Hi, and welcome to another video from Henry's Sports Media. I encourage you to like and subscribe because that's what helps out my channel. And I've seen not a lot of subscriptions, but significant amounts of views. So if you watch this video and you like it, whether you agree with my picks or not, I appreciate if you subscribe because then you can get then you can see more content even if you disagree with it. So you can kind of see the list already, unfortunately, but just don't look ahead, if you will. It's the top 10 MLB players in the league right now. And this is the first video I've done on MLB players, and I felt like I made an NBA player ranking video, and I kind of care about the MLB probably more than the NBA at this point, so it just seemed like the right thing to do to put out an MLB ranking video. And what I've got up here is the last 3 seasons statistics. So I just feel like anything beyond that point of 3 seasons, it's still important, but it's really only important to look at, is this player consistently playing well? So really, I only have the last 3 seasons, which is 2018 to 2020, and you can just see what they did, their batting stats for those years. I use Baseball Reference for this. And, and that's just a way that you can kind of see what's going on. But I'll also talk about players. I might even get up Baseball Reference if I feel like it. And just tell you, these are my picks. I've got some controversial ones, obviously. I don't expect you to agree with all of them, if any of them. I do think you should agree with Trav and Betts as number 1 and 2. I think that's quite obvious. But, there's going to be some things that you're going to think are ridiculous. Probably the first thing you're going to see is no Juan Soto or Acuna on this beginning. They've fallen at 6 and 7. And you might also have a problem with DeGrom at 3. I'm not really sure who you are and what your opinions on baseball are, but please comment if you disagree, if you think something's off, if you think something weird. It's just my opinion. It's just what I think the league's at right now. My opinions on things and what things are important are probably going to be completely different than yours, and that's okay. I'm not saying these are the top 10. I know that's what the title says, but it's really my top 10. In fact, I am going to change that. Because I'm not telling you that this is the top 10 players, I'm telling you that this is what I think the top 10 players are. And there's a big distinction, I think. So we've got number 1 being Mike Trout, and I might as well put the in for this section. Now, I'm one of the few people who thinks that Trout's title may be starting to fall out, and I know that's not a common opinion, but I think Mookie Betts, he's starting to get on that level of dominant consistency. And what I mean by dominant consistency is playing at elite level year after year after year. He's starting to get there because for the past countless years, he's just put up really, really impressive numbers. But he's not there yet, obviously, and neither is a guy like Jacob DeGrom. Back-to-back Cy Youngs and then pretty close to it. Not a lot of people can do that. And if you look at it, how many pitchers win 2 Cy Youngs in back-to-back seasons? There's not a lot of them. He's starting to put himself onto that level of guys like Clayton Kershaw and Sandy Koufax and Pedro Martinez. Now he's not there yet, but if he continues to pitch this way for a few more years, then that level of just eliteness, and any way you put it, is comparable to those greats. It's hard to be the best player in the league as a pitcher, but he could certainly do it in the next few years. I think those are pretty much it for players who could really surpass Mike Trout in the near future. Obviously, the youngsters like Bellinger, Acuna, Soto, they're really good, but I feel like it's going to take a little longer if they want to do that. But first off, we've obviously got Mike Trout. You can debate it as much as you want. I think it's pretty much fact that he's the best player in the league. If we look at these stats over the last 3 seasons, he's batting .298. He hit 229 RBIs, 101 home runs, and a 1.070 OPS with a 184 OPS plus. Now, that OPS plus I think is going to be the best you see out of anyone on this list. Offensively, he's just a beast. He consistently bats close to 300. 298 obviously shows that. His power is unworldly. I mean, 2020 was a very short season, so to still have 34 home runs per season, which is very respectable for 3 full seasons, and he did it in one 60-game stretch, one relatively short season in 2019, and one full season. It's just ridiculous. If you look at the 162-game average, that's 50 home runs out of Mike Trout, and he's obviously got pop, but that's kind of to a different level. He's the type of guy who could put up 300, 400, 600, 1,000 with 40 home runs and close to Gold Glove defense. And there's no one else who does that. I get that his speed and defense are really going down at a pretty rapid pace now, but his offense is getting higher. His power is just exploding. And in terms of plate discipline, there's not a lot of guys who are better. I'm not sure if we can find walks here. Yeah, he's averaging 133 walks per 162 games, so that's almost a walk per game. Not a lot of people do that. So Mike Trout's the best player in baseball. I think that's fairly obvious. And then number 2, who I also think is clearly in his spot, is Mookie Betts. And Mookie Betts is the second best player in baseball because, like Trout, he has that, which I was talking about earlier, dominant consistency. And if we look at his stats for the past 3 seasons, they're obviously going to be boosted by that MVP 2018 just absolutely beastly performance where he batted .346. But through these 3 seasons, now on the Dodgers, he's got a .314 batting average with 77 home runs, which I would like to add is only 24 less than Mike Trout, who's considered to have much more power than him. A .981 OPS, 400 OBP, close to 600 slugging, and on top of that, 56 stolen bases, and 311 runs. So if you took a 162 out of Betts, you'd see 148 runs, which is absurd. 37 home runs. This is not a power guy, but he actually has serious pop. 16 home runs in the last season. That is really, really power worthy. That's on pace to get like about 41. I'm not saying he's going to continue that over a 60-game stretch, but that 37 per 162 shows that he is a legitimate, powerful hitter. And then obviously the .314 batting average is quite impressive. If you can steal almost 30, hit almost 40 home runs, and bat over 300, and then also win the Gold Glove, you're one of the best players in baseball. I'm not saying he's going to do all of that necessarily in the next season. His speed is going slightly down. His batting averages are going slightly down. His fielding as he gets older is probably going slightly down. But, he even with it declining slightly, he really bounced back from a slightly worse 2019 in 2020. I feel like solidifying himself as the best player in the league. And I just feel like he has the combination of average, speed, power, defense, and there's just not a lot of guys who have that level of consistency. I mean, he's a legitimate 5-tool player, and there's just not a lot of people who are better than him. I mean, even look at walks. 202 walks, that's like 60 less than Mike Trout, who's considered a legend in terms of plate discipline. So, I mean, you're just seeing, like, this is a really, really, really good player who kind of does it all. And then number 3, ahead of all other hitters, is Jacob deGrom. And this is what my brother told me, and I didn't really believe it at first, but just looking into the numbers a little more, what I was saying, deGrom is on track to be putting up Kershaw, Martinez, Koufax, Randy Johnson, Nolan Ryan level numbers if he continues to do it for a few more years. Because a 2.10 ERA with a 162-game average of 281 strikeouts, I mean, that's just legendary. 2.10. That's 3 seasons. That's 489 innings, right? That's a really, really, really long stretch to be keeping up a 2.10 ERA. I mean, he goes on the mound, and I know he doesn't get a lot of wins, but you still expect a win out of him, and he still really, really helps your team. And also a .943 whip. That's also just absurd for that long of a stretch. And, obviously he doesn't win a lot of games, and that's obviously his downside. I mean, to put up 8, 12, and 9 for a 162 game stretch out of wins, that's obviously just not very good. But I don't know. I feel like that's not really his fault. That's the Mets' fault, and the Mets are now a much better team. I expect those wins to go up. I think that's really his only problem. And I don't think wins are that important of a stat for a pitcher. I think they're less important than strikeouts or ERA. So yeah, I mean, DeGrom, just an absolute beast. Not much else to say there. He's going to be the number 3. So then Cody Bellinger coming in at number 4. And that's certainly controversial. I mean, it wouldn't be if this was a year ago when he had just come off the MVP and a Gold Glove, and he was just looking like the best player in the league. But obviously that changes with a bad 2020 where guys like Acuna and Soto had absurd 2020 seasons. But I feel like here's the thing. 2020 was 60 games, and Bellinger played badly, but I think a good way to put it is, imagine if 2020 was the first 60 games of a 162 game season, and Bellinger was batting what he was batting after 60 games, but it was in a 162 game season, and Soto and Acuna and everyone else was doing what they were doing. Would you be putting Soto and Acuna ahead of Bellinger? No, because you'd be saying, okay, this is only the beginning of the season, so I don't think it should be traded any more than any other 60 game stretch. And that's a problematic thing, because Bellinger, yes, I know these last 3 seasons don't look that great. 276 batting average with 84 home runs. That's on pace to hit the same amount of home runs as Mookie Betts, with a way worse average and worse fielding, and really kind of worse than any other category. But you have to remember, like, he won the MVP, and he's not 37 home run power. He's 40, 45 home run power, because that's what he did in 2019, and that's what he would have done in 2020 if it was a 162 game season. I think that's not very debatable to me. I feel like he's young enough that having a bad 2018 just means that he was too young to really become a star in this league. And I think 2019 was a breakout season, but it was more than just a breakout season. It was a showing of what this guy is capable of, because he's really not that much older than Acuna or Soto. He's played one more season in the league, right? So what you see from those guys, I think, and you look at their first few seasons, it's just like looking at Bellinger's first few seasons, where he might not have been nearly as good, but it was just due to being young and having less experience. And then, on top of that, he's a Gold Glove winning defensive player, so even if offensively he's not good as some of the guys who are coming up in this list, defensively, I think he really makes up for it. So Bellinger comes in at 4, and number 5 is Christian Yelich, and I think these guys are really, really, really close together in talent. They competed for the MVP in 2019. And, Yelich had the better offensive season, but I think other things played a role in Bellinger actually taking the award. But 2018 to 2020, we see for Christian Yelich a 1.005 OPS, which is not really rivaling Mike Trout, because Mike Trout is the best with a 1.07, but not too far off with a 1.005. And in terms of power, 45 game 162 average, 94 walks per 162, 125 runs per 162. Power-wise, he's up there with everyone else. BA-wise, he's up there with everyone else. He's a little bit like Soto, where he lacks in other things, but you have to remember, 28 steals per 162, 19 average per season. He has legitimate speed. It's a weapon that no one's talking about for him, but is really something. He's faster than Cody. Well, he might not be faster than Bellinger, but he's a much better base stealer. And he really only lacks in defense, where he's not a problem, he's just not a plus. And that offensive side it really makes up for everything else. I mean, to put up 300, 400, 600, 1,000, and then along with that to be, hitting 40 home runs and doing everything else he does, it looks like Mike Trout, to be honest. It looks a little bit like Mike Trout's offensive numbers, and obviously in the other things he lacks, and obviously he hasn't done it for as long as Mike Trout, and obviously he's not as good of a player as Mike Trout. But he is legitimately in that offensive conversation. I think he's one of the top offensive players in the league. I think that's pretty undebatable. And I mean, my gut tells me that Bellinger's better just because I feel like Bellinger plays the game with more dominance. The robbed home runs, the crazy hits, the ginormous home runs and the bat flips. But baseball is a statistic game, and Christian Yelich's statistics, to be honest, are probably better. But I think Bellinger, he had the monster 2019. It's just a matter if you think 2019 is an embodiment of what his game is, as opposed to 2018 and 2020, where he's more like 260 BA on pace to hit 25 home runs. And that's not very good. And that doesn't look like a top 10 player. So that's how you justify him being out of the top 10. But if you look at 2019 and say this is who he is, then he's certainly a top 10 player, probably a top 5. And that's what I think. I think, even in the seasons where he put up bad statistics, he really played with a dominance, with the look of a top 5 player, and he did actually have the statistics in 2019. So definitely a close race between those two, but I'm going to have to give it to Bellinger. And then number 6, exiting that kind of first tier in Yelich, Bellinger, DeGrom, Trout, and Betts, we've got Ronald Acuna Jr. And like Yelich and Bellinger, him and Soto, I think, come kind of hand in hand. But I really strongly believe that Acuna is the top out of those two players. And the reason why is because, well, he might be slightly worse in terms of offense. He's got more offensive consistency, and he makes up for any lack in speed and defense. Now, he's not quite the Gold Glove player that someone like Bellinger or Betts is, but he's pretty close. He has a lot of defensive worth. And then on top of that, the 40-40 potential out of this guy is really, really impressive. There's just not a lot of guys who can do that. And yeah, I mean, he was three stolen bases shy, right? He's one of the best, he's probably the best stolen base player in this list. And on top of that, he's got some of the best power. Juan Soto doesn't hit as many home runs as Ronald Acuna. He doesn't steal as many bases. He bats for a better average. He has more discipline. But I think there's a lot of things that would make Acuna the better player, and it's all those other factors. And offensively, it's not like it's a weak point. He's got plenty of power, 42 per 162. He bats for great averages, a 281 BA in the last 3 seasons. He's got a 909 OPS. That's still absurd. That's still incredible as a hitter, and kind of like someone like Bellinger, he's obviously a fantastic player in any way you look at it, because you can see it in his game. He's kind of like a guy like Tatis. He just plays the game with a certain, pizzazz that it just makes you look like a great player, and I think it means that he is a great player. Obviously, the eye test is not a very important thing in baseball, but it is a legitimate thing, and he certainly gets the eye test over a guy like Soto. And I don't have this recency bias that a lot of people have. Juan Soto has been an elite player for 1 season, and that 1 season was a 60-game stretch. So I'll go back to this, which I was talking about for guys like Bellinger. If Juan Soto batted .351 in a 60-game stretch, or 45, because he only played 47 games, right? But it was a 162-game season. Would people be putting him as the 3rd best player in the MLB? No, they wouldn't. Would they be putting him over guys like Acuna and Yelich and Bellinger and DeGrom? No, they wouldn't. He's the 7th best because, well, he's obviously showed hitting prowess in 2018 and 2019, and he obviously exploded in 2020. There's no confirmation that his 2020 self is what he is, opposed to his 2019 and 2018. I think there's even less confirmation of that than with Bellinger, because Bellinger did it for a full season, where Juan Soto did it for 60 games. Soto, obviously, though, a great hitter. His 162-game average for the past 3 seasons, 36 home runs, and this slash line is really beastly. The 415 OBP, obviously really impressive. He's got legitimate pop, he's got legitimate contact ability, and his discipline is just off the charts. So Soto, obviously a great player, and that Nationals team is underrated, man. I mean, they got Josh Bell, they got Kyle Schwarber, their pitching staff is still elite with Strasburg, Corbin, and Scherzer. So obviously the loss of Rendon is going to hurt them, but Trey Turner's a beast. They made some pickups. They got John Lester. I mean, they had a great offseason. They had an underrated offseason, and, they've got a lot of players who are just due for explosions, and a lot of players who have already showed that they can explode. So I mean, just a ton of stuff on this team's side, and they're certainly going to do well next season. But then coming in at 8, starting to wrap up this video and this ranking, is Nolan Arenado. So Arenado is one of those guys who had a bad 2020, but I like to forget about it. And I'm not going to put him ahead of Soto because, I mean, I like to be independent, but I also like to respect critics, and what they have to say because I know they have more of an idea about things than I do. And critics usually have Arenado out of the top 10 and Soto in the top 5. And, well, I can't put it that drastically. I can let this go. Soto's a player who's steadily increased his value every single season, and well, he's not going to be putting up a 351 batting average for a full season. He's going to be putting up closer to that probably than the 280, 290 that we were seeing in the other years of his career. Well, Arenado, we're obviously not going to see the 250 of 2020, but we might see a little bit farther away from the 300 of 2019. So, where Arenado is getting older, and he had a bad 2020. Nolan Arenado is exiting his prime and had a bad 2020. Soto is entering his prime and had a good 2020. Also, obviously, Arenado heading out of Coors and going to St. Louis. I really hope he proves himself that he's a legitimate good hitter, and it's not just because he played in an easy stadium, but it might not happen, and that's important to consider. But the reason why I could argue for Arenado being over Soto is the defense. Look, he's not as good of a hitter, but if you look at these stats offensively, 299 batting average is really good, 40 home runs per 162. If you hit 40 home runs and bat 300 with a 920 OPS, look, you're one of the best players in the game. And then you combine that with 8 straight Gold Glove awards. His offense may be lacking, but his defense certainly isn't. 8 Gold Gloves, that's just going to continue to rise. He's starting to really make a case for him to be one of the best, if not the best, defensive third basemen of all time in the next few years. Because, I mean, just 8 straight Gold Gloves is just otherworldly. Defensively, he's one of the best defenders in the league. And offensively, he's a legitimate threat. Even if he exits Coors, even if he's on the decline, even if he had a bad 2020, even if he's getting older, the consistency, look, for 5 straight seasons, he had close to 40 home runs with over 100 RBIs and an over 280 batting average. That type of consistency is not matched really by anyone else other than Mike Trout on this list. And while that consistency is obviously starting to lack now, he's still a great offensive player, and he's obviously an elite defensive player. I feel like he still needs to be in this top 10. So 9 is Garrett Cole. We've got our second pitcher on this list. And he is certainly a beast. I can't agree with you if you think he's better than DeGrom, because if you look at it, DeGrom back-to-back Cy Young, he's consistently been a better pitcher than Cole for 3 straight seasons. And I know Cole might have had the better 2019, but it was slight enough that everything else kind of makes up for it in DeGrom's case. And you look at Cole, he's obviously a beast, but he's just not quite in that tier that DeGrom is. 2.71 ERA over the past 3 seasons, with a 42-13 win-loss record. And, a strikeout beast, averaging 308 per 162, and obviously the 326 in 2019 was otherworldly, but I think that he's going to settle into a kind of close to 300 strikeout, high 2 ERA form, which is obviously elite, but he didn't get off to nearly as fast of a start as a guy like DeGrom, so he's actually starting to get up there in age, and I know pitchers can sustain their prime for longer, and I'm not saying that he's on the decline, but I'm saying that, he might not necessarily be getting any better, and his best seasons might be behind him. And that doesn't mean that he's not still having elite seasons, but it means that he's not going to get any better, and I don't think he can climb into this top 5 range, because he's just, he's a pitcher, and he's doing crazy stuff, but it's not on the level of a guy like Jacob DeGrom. Obviously an elite pitcher, though, obviously an incredibly big pickup for the Yankees that's really going to hurt anyone who has a team in the AL and wants to make the World Series, including me with my Minnesota Twins. And then number 10, another player who made a move in the offseason recently, and that's Francisco Lindor. So Lindor, he's a great defensive player, and he's also a really strong offensive player. And those And that duo kind of resembles a player like Mookie Betts. Really strong offensively, and then also provides a great defense at his position. Multiple Gold Gloves for Lindor. He was winning Gold Gloves over Andrelton Simmons, one of the best defensive players, one of the best defensive shortstops of all time. Just a defensive masterpiece. And he's not winning Gold Gloves anymore, but he's still a great player. But then he falls in at 10 on this list because if you look at his offensive numbers, they just don't resemble everyone else. Power-wise, he actually is a really big power threat, averaging 36 home runs per 162 games. He hit 38 in 2018, 32 in 2019. He's got legitimate power, more than a lot of players or a lot of people think. But, it's still not on the level of the other hitters on this list, and then he doesn't make up for it with other stats like his OBP 343. That's horrendous compared to the other guys. I mean, look, 367 for Arenado, 415 for Soto, 371 for Acuna, 405 for Yelich, 369 for Bellinger, and then 405 for Betts and 439 for Trout. So just by far the worst out of all those people, the 343, and then a 502 slugging, also pretty bad for this list, and the 845 OPS is by far the worst. Offensively, he's not a problem by any means, but he's not in the category that puts you on the level of the other hitters in this list, and I think that's how you can argue that a guy like Tatis, who is a much better offensive player, and at this point not that much worse of a defensive player, could go ahead of him, but I still think Lindor's a stud. I think he's going to do really well in New York. He's got speed, he's got offense, he's got defense. Now, he might not be on the level of any of those categories as anyone else, but he's done it consistently for a really long time, and he's done it at a high level. He's an all-around player, and I think, he will soon be surpassed by guys like Tatis and LeMahieu and Rendon and other players that I'm not mentioning right now. I think he's getting to that age, he's getting to that level where he had a bad 2020 and he wasn't exceptional in the following seasons, but I still think he's the best shortstop in the league. I still think he is a top 10 player. He's really, really close. He's really on the edge, but I still have him there. Might be a little generous, but I obviously care about what they've done consistently for the past few seasons rather than just 2020 and possibly 2019. So there's my top 10 players. It's Trout, Betts, DeGrom, Bellinger, Yelich, Acuna, Soto, Arenado, Cole, and Lindor. Don't expect you to agree with it. There's a lot of problematic things for some people, but I think that I did a pretty good job describing why my picks are the way they are. And I hope you like this video. So if you did like it, even if you disagreed with it, please like, please comment, please subscribe, because those things would really help me get going. I mean, the more subs I get, the more abilities I have to make these videos better for the people who are watching them, and it's just going to improve everything. I think I've got some really good sports content that I can give, and it would really help if you give me a chance to get going by subscribing to these videos. But thanks for watching. This is my top 10 players in the league right now for the MLB, and I'm out.